The human heart never lies. It speeds up when we are afraid. It pounds when we are guilty. On the night of October 23rd, Richard Sterling told the police he was in a deep sleep when an intruder broke into his home and attacked his wife in the basement. He said he didn't hear a thing. He said he woke up hours later to find the tragedy. He was a convincing actor. He had the tears. He had the shock. But Richard forgot he was wearing a witness on his left wrist. A witness that was counting every step he took and every beat of his lying heart. Let us go to the wealthy suburbs of Connecticut. It is a place of manicured lawns, high fences, and private lives. Richard and Connie Sterling lived in a sprawling estate that was the envy of the neighborhood. Richard was a real estate developer facing a mountain of secret debt. Connie was the heir to a fortune that Richard desperately needed to access. But Connie had recently updated her will. If they divorced, he would get nothing. Richard decided he couldn't afford a divorce. He needed to be a widower. The plan was brutal and simple. Richard waited for a stormy night, common in late October. He staged a break-in. He smashed the back window of the basement. He overturned furniture. He wanted it to look like a robbery gone wrong. At 10 p.m., he went downstairs to the basement gym where Connie was working out. He silenced her quickly. Then, he went back upstairs, washed his hands, put on his pajamas, and got into bed. He lay there for an hour, composing himself, before calling 911 at 11:15 p.m. in a fake panic. "Someone broke in," he screamed. "My wife. I think she's dead." When the detectives arrived, Richard stuck to his story. "I went to bed at 9 p.m. He told them. "I took a sleeping pill. I was out cold. I didn't wake up until I heard a loud crash just now." The timeline seemed to fit. There were no witnesses. The storm masked any noise. It looked like a random, tragic home invasion. But Detective Vance noticed something small. Richard was wearing a fitness tracker, a sleek, black band on his wrist. Richard was obsessed with his health. He tracked his sleep, his steps, his calories. He never took it off. Police seized the device and the phone it was synced to. Richard wasn't worried. He thought the device just counted steps. He didn't know it recorded a timeline of his physiology. The data analyst pulled the logs for the night of October 23rd. Richard claimed he was out cold, sleeping from 9 p.m. to 11:15 p.m. The data told a violent truth. At 9 p.m., the device showed he was indeed lying still. But at 9:55 p.m., there was a surge of activity. He took 40 steps. That was the distance from the bedroom to the basement. Then, the most damning evidence, his heart rate. A sleeping man has a heart rate of around 60 beats per minute. At 10:05 p.m., Richard's heart rate spiked to 140 beats per minute. That is the heart rate of a man running or a man killing. The data continued. After the spike, the heart rate didn't go back to sleep levels. It stayed elevated at 100 beats per minute for the next hour, and the step counter showed him pacing, back and forth in the bedroom, while he claimed he was in a deep, drug-induced sleep. His watch proved he was awake, pacing the floor, waiting for enough time to pass to make his 911 call believable. When they showed Richard the graph, a red line spiking exactly when his wife died, he couldn't explain it. "Were you dreaming of running a marathon, Richard?" the detective asked. "Or were you cleaning up a crime scene?" The silent watch on his wrist had screamed the truth louder than any witness could. The Sterling house is quiet now. The secrets hidden in the basement have been brought to light. The storm has passed. At 20 degrees below zero, the world stops moving. On the night of January 12th, deep in the Adirondack Mountains, silence was the only witness. When the police finally broke down the heavy oak door of the Blackwood cabin, they were hit by a wall of freezing air. Inside, sitting by a cold fireplace, was Julian Blackwood. He was frozen solid. There were no footprints in the fresh snow around the cabin, no tire tracks, no signs of forced entry. The coroner said he died at 8 p.m., but at 8 p.m., the only person who had a reason to kill him was sitting in a police station 40 miles away, filing a report about a missing husband. It was the perfect alibi, or so it seemed, because in the extreme cold, time can be a liar. Let us travel to the frozen wilderness of upstate New York. Here, the winter is not just a season, it is a force of nature. Julian Blackwood was a man who thrived on control, a wealthy architect who built his cabin to be a fortress against the world. He was brilliant, arrogant, and cruel. His wife, Sarah, was a shadow in his life, a former nurse who had slowly lost her spark under Julian's suffocating grip. They had driven up to the cabin for a reconciliation weekend, but the locals knew better. Julian was planning to divorce her. He was planning to leave her with nothing, citing a prenuptial agreement that was as cold as the mountain air. Sarah knew this, and she knew she had one weekend to change her fate. The blizzard hit on Friday afternoon, a whiteout storm. At 6 p.m., Sarah drove her SUV into the town of Lake Placid. She was seen by 3 waitresses at a diner. She ordered coffee. She looked worried. At 7:30 p.m., she walked into the sheriff's station. "My husband isn't answering the radio," she told them, her voice trembling. "The power is out at the cabin. I'm scared." The sheriff told her to stay in town. The roads were too dangerous. When the storm cleared the next morning, the deputies made their way to the cabin. They found Julian. He was sitting in his armchair, a glass of whiskey on the table. The fireplace was empty. The windows were iced over from the inside. The medical examiner arrived and performed the standard tests. Based on algor mortis, the rate at which a body cools after death, he estimated the time of death to be between 7:45 p.m. and 8:15 p.m. This was the key. At that exact time, Sarah was sitting inside the sheriff's station, surrounded by police officers. It was physically impossible for her to be the killer. For months, the case went nowhere. It was ruled a heart attack brought on by the extreme cold when the heating failed. Sarah inherited the estate. She sold the cabin. She moved on. But Detective Vance, a man who had lived in the mountains his whole life, couldn't let it go. Something bothered him about the cabin. Why was the fireplace empty? Julian was a survivalist. If the power went out, he would have lit a fire immediately. Why did he just sit there and freeze? Vance decided to look at the one thing the storm couldn't destroy: the data. The cabin was rustic on the outside, but it was smart on the inside. It was equipped with a Hive smart thermostat system, which logged temperature data to the cloud. Vance subpoenaed the logs, hoping to see when the power failed. But the logs showed something strange. The power didn't fail. At 2 p.m., 4 hours before Sarah left for town, the thermostat was manually set to 95 degrees Fahrenheit, 35 degrees Celsius. The furnace kicked into overdrive. The cabin became a sauna. Then, at 4:30 p.m., just before Sarah left, the system was set to OFF, and the windows in the bedroom were recorded as open by the security sensors for 10 minutes, then closed. Vance consulted with the forensic pathologist. "What happens?" Vance asked, "if a body is kept in a 95-degree room for 2 hours after death, and then the room is plunged to sub-zero temperatures?" The pathologist went pale. "It messes up the math," he said. The heat would keep the body warm, delaying the onset of rigor mortis and keeping the internal temperature high. It would make it look like he died hours later than he actually did. The puzzle pieces clicked into place. Sarah didn't kill him at 8 p.m. She killed him at 2:30 p.m. using a lethal injection of insulin, untraceable in a standard autopsy if not looked for, which she had access to as a former nurse. He died instantly. Then, she turned the heat up to the maximum. She baked the room. This kept his body temperature at 98.6 degrees for hours, even though he was dead. Before she left at 5 p.m., she turned the heat off and opened the windows to let the freezing blizzard air rush in, flash freezing the scene. When the coroner checked the body the next day, the math told him the death happened at 8 p.m., but the math was based on a lie. Vance drove to Sarah's new home in Florida. He didn't have a warrant. He just had the thermostat logs printed on a piece of paper. He laid it on the table in front of her. "You can trick a coroner," Vance said softly, "but you can't trick the physics of heat." Sarah looked at the paper. The line on the graph went up and then crashed down. It was the heartbeat of her crime. She didn't fight. She was tired of the cold. Julian Blackwood thought he controlled his environment, but in the end, the temperature was controlled by the one person he underestimated. The cabin is empty now. The snow buries the secrets every winter. Wine needs to breathe, but the woman locked inside the cellar could not. On the night of December 4th, during the heaviest storm of the season, Isabella Ricci was found dead in the family's wine vault. The door was a foot thick, made of steel and oak. Her husband, Marco, claimed it was a tragic malfunction. He said the electronic lock had jammed. He said he was miles away at a tasting event when she got trapped. He cried for the cameras. He sued the lock manufacturer. It looked like a terrible accident in a house full of expensive toys. But Marco forgot one thing. Smart homes don't just follow commands. They keep a diary. And that night, the house recorded exactly who locked the door. Let us travel to the rolling hills of Napa Valley. It is a place of beauty, silence, and old money. The Ricci estate was famous for its Cabernet Sauvignon and its high-tech architecture. Marco Ricci was a charismatic winemaker who loved the spotlight. Isabella was the quiet force behind the business, the one who actually balanced the books. And the books were bleeding red. Marco had gambled away their profits on bad investments. Isabella was preparing to sell the vineyard to save them from bankruptcy. Marco couldn't bear the shame of losing his legacy. He decided he would rather lose his wife. The plan relied on the estate's pride and joy. The vault. A state-of-the-art, climate-controlled wine cellar built underground. It was airtight, soundproof, and fireproof. To preserve the vintage bottles, the room was equipped with a specialized fire suppression system that could suck the oxygen out of the air to stop a fire instantly. It was also secured by a smart lock that could be controlled from a phone. On the night of the storm, Marco told Isabella to go down to the vault to check on a leak he thought he heard. He kissed her goodbye and left for a dinner party in town, 30 minutes away. This was his alibi. He would be surrounded by witnesses while she was alone. At 7 p.m., Marco arrived at the restaurant. He was charming, loud, and visible. At 11 p.m., he returned home. He called 911 in a panic. "My wife is in the vault. The door won't open. The keypad is dead." When emergency crews drilled through the lock, they found Isabella slumped against the door. The cause of death was asphyxiation. The oxygen levels in the room had dropped fatally low. Marco claimed the storm must have surged the system, triggering the fire suppression and jamming the lock. It was a plausible story. The storm had caused power outages all over the valley. For weeks, it was treated as an accidental death due to faulty equipment. But Detective Hayes, a specialist in digital forensics, didn't believe in coincidences. He seized Marco's smartphone and the smart home hub from the server room. Marco had deleted the app from his phone before handing it over, but he didn't know that the hub inside the house kept a local backup of every command sent to it. Hayes pulled the logs. The timeline was chilling. The data showed Isabella entering the vault at 6:45 p.m. using her code. Then at 6:50 p.m., the log showed a command: lock deadbolt engaged. This command didn't come from the keypad on the wall. The source code read, remote command admin user, Marco's iPhone. Marco had locked her in from the driveway just before driving away. But the most damning piece of evidence came next. At 7:30 p.m., while Marco was ordering appetizers at the restaurant, the log showed another command sent from his phone via 4G. System override. Activate fire suppression test mode. He didn't just lock her in. He remotely triggered the system to suck the oxygen out of the room. He killed her from a dinner table 10 miles away, between sips of wine. When Hayes showed Marco the log, a digital receipt of murder, Marco's arrogance vanished. He thought the storm would cover his tracks. He thought the glitch excuse would work. But in the world of the Internet of Things, every click is a footprint. Isabella hadn't died by accident. She was executed by an app. The Ricci estate is quiet now. The vines continue to grow, indifferent to the tragedy. The technology that was meant to protect the wine became a weapon. But the truth always finds a way to breathe. Labor Day weekend, the unofficial end of summer. In the Hamptons, this is usually a time of parties and fireworks. But at the Sterling estate, the party was over long before it began. On the morning of September 3rd, the automatic cover of the infinity pool was slowly retracted by the police. Underneath, floating in the stillness of the heated water, was Julianne Sterling. She was a former competitive swimmer, a woman who could hold her breath for 4 minutes. Her husband, Grant, told the detectives she must have hit her head during a late-night swim while he was driving back to the city for a meeting. It was a sad, lonely accident. But accidents are chaotic. Murders are calculated. Grant thought he had accounted for everything. The time, the alibi, the lack of witnesses. But he forgot that his house was smarter than he was. He forgot that the pool keeps its own diary. Let us travel to the tip of Long Island, New York, to a world of sand dunes, tall grass, and houses that cost more than most islands. Julianne Sterling came from old money. She was graceful, sharp, and fiercely protective of her inheritance. Grant was new money. He was a hedge fund manager who loved the thrill of the gamble. But the gamble had failed. Grant had secretly lost millions in a volatile market. He was facing an SEC investigation and total bankruptcy. Julian knew about the losses. She had prepared divorce papers that would leave him destitute. Grant knew he had 1 weekend left to turn a divorce into a funeral. If she died while they were still married, he would inherit everything. The lawsuit would disappear. The debt would be paid. The atmosphere that weekend was heavy. A tropical storm was moving up the coast, emptying the beaches. Grant dismissed the staff early on Sunday, claiming he and Julianne wanted a private evening before closing the house for the winter. The house was huge, echoing with the sound of the wind. At 7 p.m., Julianne poured herself a glass of wine and went to the pool deck to watch the storm roll in. Grant was inside, pacing. He told her he had an urgent crisis at the office and had to drive back to Manhattan immediately. He kissed her goodbye. He got in his car. He drove away. Or at least, that's what he wanted the cameras to see. Grant's plan was complex. He drove his car out of the driveway, past the security cameras at the gate. He drove for 5 miles, then turned onto a hidden service road that led back to the dunes behind the house. He parked the car in the dark, walked through the tall grass, and approached the pool deck from the blind spot of the cameras. Julianne was swimming laps, enjoying the warm water against the cold rain. She didn't hear him over the roar of the ocean. He waited until she surfaced at the edge. He didn't use a weapon. He used the pool cover. The pool had a heavy, motorized safety cover designed to hold the weight of a car. With a remote control he had cloned, he activated the close sequence while holding her under with the pool skimmer pole. It was brutal, silent, and effective. Once the cover was fully closed and locked, trapping her underneath, he slipped back into the shadows, returned to his car, and drove to the city. When he arrived in the city at 10 p.m., he called her. No answer. He called again. Then he called the neighbors. "I'm worried," he said. "She's not picking up." The police arrived and found the scene exactly as he intended. Julianne trapped under the cover. It looked like she had accidentally triggered the mechanism while swimming and couldn't get out in time. A tragic malfunction. Grant played the role of the devastated husband perfectly. He had GPS data from his phone showing him on the highway. He had toll booth receipts. Detective Miller, a veteran of high society crimes, felt the setup was too clean. He looked at Grant's car, a luxury electric sedan. Grant had turned off the GPS location, sharing on his phone, during the murder window. But he couldn't turn off the car's internal black box or telematics control unit. Miller pulled the logs from the car manufacturer. The data was incredibly specific. It showed the car leaving the house at 7:15 p.m., but it didn't show a continuous drive to the city. The tire pressure sensors and suspension logs showed the car sat stationary for 45 minutes between 7:30 p.m. and 8:15 p.m. And crucially, the GPS coordinates during that stationary period weren't on the highway. They were in the service road, exactly 500 yards behind the Sterling estate. The car knew it was parked in the dunes while Grant was committing the crime. But the final, undeniable proof came from the pool itself. The pool cover system was a smart cover connected to the home automation network. Grant claimed Julianne must have accidentally hit the button on the wall while swimming. Miller consulted the system engineer. The log showed the close command was issued at 7:45 p.m., but the log detailed how the command was sent. The wall switch registers as hardwire input. The remote control registers as RF signal. The log showed command source, RF remote number 2. Remote number 2 was the spare key fob usually kept in the safe. But more importantly, the motor load sensors told a horrifying story. The motor current spiked 3 times during the closing sequence. This meant the cover hit resistance. Something was pushing back against it. Julianne was fighting, and the cover didn't stop. It forced its way closed. An accidental press by a swimmer wouldn't involve a remote control signal from the edge of the deck. Grant held the button. The machine recorded the resistance of a life being extinguished. Confronted with the car's location data and the pool's motor logs, Grant's sophisticated alibi collapsed. The silence of the Hamptons' winter didn't protect him. The technology he bought to make his life easier ended it. He was arrested in his penthouse, watching the rain fall on the city, knowing he would never see the ocean again. The Sterling house is boarded up for the winter now. The pool is empty. The cover is still. The storm has passed, and the air is clear. The fall from Eagle Point is 300 feet straight down into a churning cauldron of freezing salt water and jagged rock. If the fall doesn't kill you, the ocean will hide you forever. On the night of November 22nd, during a massive Pacific gale, Elias Thorne disappeared from the balcony of his architectural masterpiece. His wife, Sarah, told the state police it was suicide. She said he had been depressed. She produced a typed note found on his desk. She claimed she heard nothing over the storm because she was in her soundproof art studio, wearing noise-canceling headphones. It was a tragic end for a brilliant, troubled man. But the ocean wasn't the only thing watching that night. Sarah forgot that in a house built by a software genius, the silence is never truly silent. The house was listening to the very air itself. Let us travel to the raw, wild coast of Oregon, where the forests are deep green and the ocean is a terrifying gray. Elias Thorne was a legend in Silicon Valley, a man who designed the data architecture that runs half the internet. He built the Apex as his escape, a brutalist concrete bunker hanging over the edge of the world. He was controlling, paranoid, and obsessively private. Sarah was his younger wife, a talented painter whose light was slowly being extinguished by Elias's suffocating control. She was isolated, miles from the nearest town, forbidden from having her own car, totally dependent on him. When she discovered he was secretly liquidating their assets to move them offshore before divorcing her, she knew her window for escape was closing. She didn't want just freedom. She wanted the house. She wanted the money. She wanted revenge. The plan was designed around the storm. The weather forecast predicted hurricane-force winds for Tuesday night. Sarah knew Elias's routine. Every night during a storm, he would stand on the cantilevered balcony, wrapped in a heavy coat, watching the violence of the ocean. She also established her own routine. Every night at 8 p.m., she went into her studio, put on her expensive noise-canceling headphones, and painted for 3 hours. The studio was soundproofed. The headphones were top of the line. It was the perfect sensory deprivation alibi. If a bomb went off in the living room, she could plausibly claim she heard nothing. At 9:15 p.m., the storm was at its peak. The noise outside was deafening. Elias was on the balcony, his back to the house, hypnotized by the waves below. Sarah stepped out of studio. She didn't remove her headphones. She walked silently across the polished concrete floor of the living room. She slid open the heavy glass door leading to the balcony. The wind immediately ripped into the room. Elias didn't hear the door over the roaring wind. She didn't hesitate. A violent, two-handed shove to the middle of his back. He went over the low railing without a sound that could compete with the storm. He vanished instantly into the black void below. Sarah immediately slid the heavy door shut, locking out the storm. She went back to her studio, sat in front of her easel, and waited 2 hours before discovering he was missing and calling 911 in a staged panic. Elias's body was never found. The ocean kept it, without a body and with a suicide note. The police were inclined to close the case. Sarah's alibi held up under questioning, but Detective Graves, a methodical investigator from Portland, felt the setup was too clean. He brought in a digital forensics team to analyze the Apex. Elias had built the house as a living organism. Every room had advanced environmental sensors that monitored temperature, humidity, air quality, and barometric pressure every 10 seconds. The data told a story that Sarah's words couldn't hide. The living room was kept at a constant 72 degrees. At 9:17 p.m., the sensors recorded a catastrophic environmental event. The temperature in the living room plummeted from 72 degrees to 55 degrees in under 60 seconds. The humidity spiked to 98%. The barometric pressure became chaotic. This happens when a massive, 12-foot sliding glass wall is opened during a hurricane. But the crucial detail was the duration. The log showed the door remained wide open for 8 minutes. If Elias had just stepped out to jump, the door would have been open for 30 seconds. 8 minutes was the time it took for Sarah to push him, watch him fall, stare into the abyss in shock, and then compose herself enough to close the heavy door against the wind. The house had recorded the exact duration of the murder, but the final nail in the coffin came from Sarah's own alibi, her headphones. They were high-end, smart headphones that paired with an app on her phone. She claimed she was wearing them, with noise canceling active, from 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. Detective Graves subpoenaed the usage logs from the headphone manufacturer's cloud server. The data was brutally precise. It showed the headphones were active from 8 p.m. to 9:10 p.m. Then, at 9:10 p.m., the sensors recorded that they were removed from the user's head. They sat idle on a table for 25 minutes. At 9:35 p.m., they were placed back on the head. Sarah wasn't painting in oblivious silence during the murder. She had taken them off to commit the crime. The technology she used to prove her ignorance ended up proving her guilt. Confronted with the environmental logs and her own headphone data, Sarah's carefully constructed narrative collapsed. The storm outside hadn't masked the crime. It had helped record it inside the house's digital memory. She was arrested in the minimalist living room, looking out at the same ocean that held her husband. The concrete house on the cliff is empty now. The sensors are still running, logging a silence that is no longer broken by violence. At 10,000 feet, there are no witnesses, only the wind and the ice. On the afternoon of February 14th, Derek Vance, a tech mogul and semi-professional skier, vanished into a whiteout storm on the backside of Aspen Mountain. 3 days later, his body was found at the bottom of a ravine known as the Throat. His business partner, Lucas, told the sheriff they had gotten separated in the storm. He said he shouted for Derek, but the wind swallowed his voice. It was ruled a tragic accident, a skier who took a wrong turn in zero visibility. But Derek Vance wasn't just wearing a ski suit. He was wearing a network of sensors. Lucas thought he had buried the truth under 6 feet of fresh powder. But he forgot that in the digital age, we leave a trail even when we aren't touching the ground. Let us travel to the high altitude of Colorado, where the air is thin and the money is old. Derek and Lucas were partners in a failing venture capital firm. The tension between them was an open secret. Derek had discovered that Lucas was embezzling funds to pay off gambling debts. Derek planned to expose him after their weekend trip to Aspen. He wanted to give Lucas one last chance to confess. Lucas, however, had no intention of confessing. He had looked at the weather forecast. A massive blizzard was approaching, the kind that erases tracks in minutes. On the morning of the tragedy, despite the warnings from the ski patrol, the 2 men took the lift to the summit. They ducked the rope into the backcountry, an area of unpatrolled, wild terrain. Lucas led the way. He was an expert skier, better than Derek. He led them toward the Throat, a narrow chute with a hidden drop-off that is invisible in flat light. At 2 p.m., the storm hit. The world turned white. Sky and ground became indistinguishable. This was the moment Lucas had waited for. According to Lucas's statement, he stopped to adjust his bindings. When he looked up, Derek was gone. He just skied off the edge, Lucas claimed. I tried to find him, but it was too dangerous. When the search and rescue team finally found Derek's body, he was frozen solid. His equipment was scattered. His helmet was cracked. Mounted on top of his helmet was the GoPro camera. The lens was shattered. The casing was destroyed by the impact of the fall. Lucas had seen the camera on the body. He had even stepped on it with his ski boot to ensure it was broken. He assumed the footage was gone. But he made a critical mistake. He didn't realize that Derek's camera was a newer model, one that didn't just record video, it recorded telemetry data. Detective Parker, a specialist in mountain accidents, sent the SD card to a digital forensics lab. The video files were corrupted. There was no image, just digital noise. But the metadata file, the G-metrics log, was intact. This log recorded GPS position, speed, altitude, and G-force every millisecond. Parker didn't need to see what happened. He could recreate it on a 3D map. The data told a story that contradicted Lucas entirely. Lucas claimed they were moving when they got separated. The GPS data showed that at 2:15 p.m., both men were stationary at the top of the ravine for 4 minutes. They weren't skiing. They were standing still. Why would they stand still in a freezing blizzard in a dangerous zone? Then, the audio track. Although the video was black, the microphone was shielded inside the casing. Parker isolated the audio during those 4 minutes. Over the roar of the wind, he heard voices. He heard Derek shout, "I'm going to the authorities, Lucas. It's over." He heard Lucas reply, calm and cold, "No, Derek. It's over right now." But the most damning evidence was the accelerometer data. If Derek had accidentally skied off the edge, his speed would have increased gradually as he went down the slope. The data showed something else. It showed Derek was standing still 0 miles per hour. Then a sudden, violent spike in G-force from behind. A shove, followed by immediate, chaotic acceleration as he fell. He didn't ski off the edge. He was pushed from a standstill. The accident was a physics impossibility. When Parker played the audio recording to Lucas in the warm, safe interrogation room, the color drained from his face. The wind that Lucas thought would hide his crime had actually preserved the audio perfectly, dampening the echoes. The mountain hadn't kept a secret. It had handed it over to the police on a microchip. Lucas was arrested for first-degree murder. The snow continues to fall on Aspen Mountain. The tracks are filled in. The ravine is silent again. Nature has reclaimed the scene. In the deep wilderness of Montana, silence is not empty. It is heavy. It presses against your eardrums, and it hides things. On the morning of December 10th, Cara Holbrook vanished into that silence. She and her husband, Leo, lived off-grid in a cabin 40 miles from the nearest paved road. They were survivalists, prepared for anything nature could throw at them. Leo told the lone sheriff's deputy that Cara had gone for a walk to check their trap line before a blizzard rolled in and simply never returned. He said the wilderness took her. A tragic accident in a harsh land. Leo was a man who knew how to cover his tracks in the snow. He knew how to hide physical evidence from human eyes. But he forgot that even in the middle of nowhere, the sky is watching. He forgot that off-grid doesn't mean invisible. Not anymore. Let us travel to the spine of the continent, to the Bitterroot National Forest. This is a place where if you scream, no one hears you. Leo and Cara had moved there 5 years ago to escape the noise of the city. Leo was intense, controlling, and paranoid about societal collapse. He built their cabin like a fortress. Cara was gentler, a botanist who loved the solitude but hated the isolation Leo forced upon her. In the months leading up to her disappearance, she had secretly used their emergency satellite phone to contact a divorce lawyer in Missoula. She was planning an escape. Leo, sensing he was losing control of his only subject, decided to make her escape permanent. The timing was deliberate. A massive winter storm warning was in effect. According to Leo's statement, at 3 p.m., just as the first heavy flakes began to fall, Kara put on her snowshoes and grabbed her rifle to check a game camera half a mile from the cabin. Leo claimed he stayed behind to chop firewood. When she didn't return by dark, at 5 p.m., he said he went looking for her. He described frantic hours of searching in the blizzard, shouting her name into the roaring wind, until the cold forced him back inside. He didn't call the authorities until the next day at noon, using their satellite radio. By the time search and rescue arrived on snowmobiles, 3 feet of fresh snow had buried the world. There were no tracks, no scent for the dogs, nothing. It was the perfect crime scene because there was no scene at all. The search lasted 2 weeks. Leo played the part of the stoic, devastated mountain man. The locals believed him. The mountain is dangerous. People disappear. But Agent Sterling from the State Bureau of Investigation was suspicious of Leo's calm demeanor. He noticed something on the roof of the off-grid cabin. A small, rectangular satellite dish. A Starlink terminal. Leo claimed they only used it for emergencies and checking weather. Sterling realized that their isolation was a lie. They were connected to the highest-speed network on the planet. Sterling decided to test the silence. He seized both Leo and Kara's smartphones. In the wilderness, there is no cell service. Your phone will show no signal. But what most people don't know is that the phone never stops trying. Every few minutes, a phone sends out a powerful ping, a digital shout into the void, looking for a tower. Even if it can't connect to make a call, a distant tower might hear that ping and log it. Sterling requested data from the 3 closest cell towers, each over 20 miles away on different mountain peaks. The data was faint, but it was there. On the day of the murder, Kara's phone pinged the eastern tower at 2:45 p.m. from inside the cabin. Then, it went silent forever. Leo had likely destroyed it. But Leo's phone told a different story. Leo claimed he was at the cabin chopping wood from 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. The tower data showed his phone pinging wildly during that time. It pinged the east tower, then 10 minutes later, the north tower, then the south tower. In a city, this happens as you drive. In the wilderness, this only happens if you are moving rapidly across vast distances, changing your line of sight to different mountain peaks. The triangulation data placed his phone moving in a wide, 4-mile arc away from the cabin and into a deep canyon, an area he never mentioned in his search story. He wasn't chopping wood. He was traveling fast on a snowmobile, disposing of a body far away from where he said she disappeared. But the final, undeniable proof came from the cabin itself. Leo claimed that after his failed search, from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m., he sat by the fire, too distraught to do anything. Agent Sterling pulled the logs from the Starlink satellite router in the cabin. The router keeps a millisecond by millisecond log of every device connected to its Wi-Fi network. The log showed that at 6:30 p.m., when Leo swore to police, he was outside in a blizzard, freezing and screaming for his wife. His personal tablet connected to the cabin's Wi-Fi. Not only did it connect, but it also streamed a 4K action movie on Netflix for 2 hours. He wasn't searching. He was inside, warm by the fire, waiting for the snow to bury his crime, watching a movie while his wife lay dead in a canyon 4 miles away. When Sterling laid the satellite logs and the cell tower triangulation map on the rough wooden table of the cabin, Leo's rugged persona crumbled. The vast emptiness of Montana hadn't protected him. The technology he used to make his isolated life comfortable had created a detailed digital diary of his guilt. In the spring, when the snow melted, his directions, based on the phone data, led them right to Kara. The cabin in the Bitterroot Mountains is empty now. The snow falls, covering the roof, sealing it off from the world again. The silence returns. Some witnesses have eyes. Others have sensors. On the misty morning of March 18th, Silas Vane called 911 from his isolated mountain retreat. He was breathless. He claimed he had woken up to find his wife, Elena, dead at the bottom of the grand staircase. He said she must have slipped in the night while going down for a glass of water. It was a tragic accident in a house designed for perfection. Silas was a meticulous man, a neat freak who controlled every inch of his environment. He had scrubbed the floor. He had staged the scene. He had the perfect timeline. But Silas forgot about the smallest resident of the house, a silent observer that woke up while he was sleeping and drew a map of the murder. Let us travel to the deep woods of Tennessee, to the Smokies. Here, the fog clings to the mountains like a heavy blanket, hiding everything. Silas and Elena Vane had moved here to save their marriage. Silas was a high-powered architect, obsessed with order and symmetry. Elena was a chaotic, vibrant sculptor who felt trapped in Silas's rigid world. The isolation that was supposed to bring them together only tore them apart. Elena had packed a bag. She hid it in the trunk of her car. She was leaving the next morning. Silas found the bag, and in that moment, his obsession with control turned lethal. The police arrived at 8 a.m. The house was immaculate. It smelled of pine and lemon. Elena lay at the foot of the stairs. Silas told the detective, "I went to bed at 10 p.m. I took a sleeping pill. I didn't hear anything until I woke up at 7 a.m. and found her." The coroner noted head trauma consistent with a fall, but Detective Caldwell, a veteran of mountain crimes, felt something was wrong. The house was too clean. There were no fingerprints on the railing, no dust on the floor. It was as if the house had been sanitized. Caldwell looked at the timeline. If Elena fell at, say, 11 p.m., she had been lying there all night. Silas claimed he was asleep upstairs, but crimes leave echoes in the data. Caldwell went to the utility closet and found the home's smart water monitor. This device tracks water usage gallon by gallon to detect leaks. He pulled the app logs. At 2:30 a.m., while Silas claimed to be in a deep, pill-induced sleep, the house consumed 300 gallons of water in 1 hour. That is not a glass of water. That is a shower running for 40 minutes. That is a washing machine running a heavy cycle. That is a man scrubbing away evidence. Silas claimed it must have been a toilet leak, a coincidence. But the water was circumstantial. The smoking gun was crawling on the floor. Silas owned a high-end robot vacuum. He had programmed it to run every night at 3 a.m. to ensure the house was perfect when he woke up. On the night of the murder, the vacuum undocked as scheduled. These machines don't just bump into things blindly. They use LiDAR lasers to build a precise, digital map of the room to navigate. They record where furniture is, where walls are, and where obstacles are. Detective Caldwell seized the vacuum and its cloud data. He opened the cleaning history for March 18th, 3 a.m. The map appeared on the screen. It showed the outline of the living room and the hallway at the bottom of the stairs. And there, right where Elena's body was found by police at 8 a.m., the robot had mapped a no-go zone. The vacuum had navigated around a large object lying on the floor at 3 a.m. It traced the outline of a human body. This proved Elena was already dead on the floor at 3 a.m. But then, Caldwell looked at the next cleaning run. Silas, in his panic to clean up, had run the vacuum again at 6 a.m., just before calling police, to make sure the carpet was spotless. In this 6 a.m. map, the object at the bottom of the stairs was gone. Why? Because Silas had moved the body. He had dragged her to the kitchen to clean the floor underneath her, then dragged her back before the police arrived. The robot saw the floor empty at 6 a.m., but the police found the body there at 8 a.m. This physical impossibility proved that Silas had manipulated the scene. He moved her after she died. When Caldwell showed Silas the two digital maps, one showing the ghost of his wife on the floor, and the next showing the empty space where he had moved her to clean, Silas went pale. He had cleaned the blood. He had wiped the fingerprints. But he couldn't wipe the memory of the machine. He had programmed the vacuum to be perfect, and it perfectly recorded his crime. The house in the Smoky Mountains is silent again. The machines are offline. The fog has lifted. The truth was hidden in the dust, but the dust always settles. And you are far away from the cold mountain mist. You are warm. You are safe in your bed. Everything is in its place. The doors are locked. The world is quiet. Let the sound of the rain wash away the tension of the day. Listen to the water. Steady, calm, endless. Let it carry you into the darkness. Sleep now. Deep, restful sleep. Good night.